Hi, I'm Matt, the chef out at Kamp Kiwanis, and today we will be cooking some apple-themed recipes for Apple Festival. I love apples, and I love everything apples. And so when I cook with apples, generally, I do not use anything like a Golden Delicious or a Red Delicious because they're super mealy. Galas are good, Macintosh are good. These are little ones from the backyard. Honey Crisp, Granny Smith. Nothing too mealy because then they're not really good. They just kind of break down in the oven or your pan, and they're not very good for cooking. So we'll get right to it. And so today we're starting with apple crisp. We've got some little Macintosh apples here from the apple tree in the backyard, and they've got a really nice tartness to them. You want to use something kind of tart, like a Granny Smith, a Honey Crisp, Macintosh, a Spartan even you could use. You could also use something a little bit sweeter, but today for our purposes we're going to use a little Macintosh from the backyard. And so we're going to start. We've got about 6 cups of chopped apples here, roughly chopped apples about bite size. And then we're going to add a 1/4 cup of lemon juice to our apples. And just a little tip, after you cut your apples, if you don't want them browning, you just want to add a little, like a tablespoon of lemon juice to them, just so they don't oxidize and brown up on you right away. So you're going to add about 1/4 cup of lemon juice there. You're going to add 1 teaspoon of ground cinnamon to the apples and 1 teaspoon of cornstarch. You can skip the cornstarch if you like your apple crisp a little bit more runny. But we're adding a little bit of cornstarch just to kind of thicken up that liquid at the bottom. And then you're going to add 1 or 3/4 cup of brown sugar to the mix. And you know what? We're going to get our hands right in there and just mix these all up. Just going to move this out of the way. And then we're going to move on to our next step. Our next step is the crisp topping. Some people like crumble, which is basically the same thing, but made with flour. I prefer a crisp, which is basically rolled oats or quick oats. So you want to start with 3 cups of rolled oats, 1 cup of brown sugar, and 3/4 cup of butter. And you're going to start by mixing that off. Make sure your butter's softened a bit. And you're going to we're also going to add 1 teaspoon of cinnamon to that mix as well. And then you're going to get your hands right in there. You can also use a fork if you don't want to dirty your hands, but I don't mind using my hands in there. And you're going to kind of crush everything up and make a paste. Make a little topping. And we'll move on to the next step in a second. And so we've got our crumble topping, or crisp topping made. We're just going to make sure it kind of clumps together a little bit. We've got lots of butter and sugar in there. And then you're just going to top off your apples. And we're using a 9x13 dish. It's a pretty standard dish for baking. And you're just going to top that off on there. And just kind of spread it out evenly. And then that's going to go in the oven at 350 degrees. For 45 to 55 minutes until you got a nice golden brown on the top and your apples are cooked. And we'll move on to the next recipe. I wanted to talk a couple variations we can use on the apple crisp. You can substitute like a 1/2 cup or a cup of your oats with like pecans or walnuts. You could also use coconut in this recipe. You could also put some raisins in there, some other chopped fruit. This works well for kind of every fruit. But today I'm keeping it simple. We're just doing a straight apple crisp. Yeah, so just use your imagination when it comes to easy desserts like this. And so our next recipe is we're going to do a little baked brie with some apples and shallots and bacon with a little bit of thyme and balsamic. And so we're going to get started here. I've already pre-cooked my bacon. I use about 4 or 5 slices of bacon, and I've drained most of the fat with the exception of about a tablespoon of fat, because you kind of want to keep all the burnt bits and a little bit of fat in there to get some of that smoky flavor. And so I'm just heating that up right now, and we're going to add our shallots. We've got 1 shallot, finely diced shallot, and I'm just going to put that right in the pan, and we're just going to sweat that off for a couple minutes. And make sure you scrape your pan to get all of those little bacon goodness in the bottom of your pan there. And then I'm just going to let that cook for a couple minutes, and we'll be right back. Next step, we're just going to take our brie wheel here. We've got a nice little brie wheel. They're fairly inexpensive. You can get them at the grocery store. And we're just going to cut just a couple tiny little slits in the sides and then a couple in the top. And I'll tell you why later. Just a little trick that I like to do. And so after that's done, we're going to take our apples, about 1.5 cups of medium diced apples. You can see our shallots here are nicely browned. We're ready to go. We're going to add our apples straight in there. And you're just going to cook your apples off for maybe a minute or two. Make sure you scrape your bottom to get all those little bacon goodness off the bottom there. And then once that's cooked there for a minute or two, you're going to go ahead and you're going to add 1/4 cup of apple cider vinegar and 1/4 cup of maple syrup straight in there. And then we're just going to cook that. You want to reduce your liquid. So basically when you reduce your liquid, you just want to get it to kind of a syrupy consistency. And then we're going to add a little bit of thyme on there, maybe a sprig or 2 of thyme. Just take your leaves off your stem. Just to add some nice savory flavors into your dish. And you're going to let that cook down. And we'll see you in a minute. We're back with our apples. They've kind of cooked down. You have a nice syrupy consistency in the bottom there. And we're just going to add a few dashes of balsamic vinegar to that, just to give it a bit more depth of flavor. Add a nice flavor to it. And we're just going to stir that all together. And then super easily, you just grab your pan and you take it over to your brie. And you want like an oven-proof dish. Just stick it into an oven-proof dish like this. Any dish will do. And then you just top your brie with your apples, just like so. There we go. And so I've got our apples on top of our brie here. And the reason that I've cut the little holes in the sides is so the brie can kind of like ooze out into the bottom of your pan, your dish, and then you'll get a nice kind of brown brie on the bottom. And yeah, and then we're just going to put that in the oven for about 20 minutes at 350 degrees. Okay, so here we're back with our baked brie, just came out of the oven. And so you can see kind of the brie kind of oozing out there. We've got some wasps that are really enjoying this. And we've got our nice apple on top there, and we've got some nice reduction from our apples as well on the bottom there. So if you cut into it, you'll see it's really nice and it's all melted now. And you'll want to serve this with either baguette, some sourdough would be awesome, some crackers, whatever you wish. And then what I'm going to do right now is we're just going to top everything with some of our bacon that we originally cooked up. You could also use a vegetarian option. You could also use like toasted pecans, toasted walnuts, pistachios would be lovely. So anything like that. You could also add some raisins in here if you wanted to. But today we're using bacon because I love bacon. So that is our baked brie with apple, shallots, and bacon. recipe today is baked apples. We're gonna fill them with some pecans and some shredded coconut and some brown sugar and some cinnamon. You can use like raisins in there, you can use like different nuts, walnuts, you can even use pistachios, would be awesome in there. So your first step is you're gonna grab your apple. I've got some smaller to medium-sized galas here, and we're just gonna take the top off. What I've done is just take the top off. You can use an apple core if you've got one, but I don't have one, so I'm just gonna, what I've done is I've just taken my little paring knife and I've just taken out the core, and then you can scoop the rest out with like a little teaspoon, a little metal teaspoon, and then just keep on cutting down. You want to keep about a 1/2 inch of apple on the bottom so your filling doesn't leak out. And then our next step, we're just basically going to move on to our filling. And so I've got a 1/2 cup of pecans, I've got a 1/2 cup of brown sugar, a 1/4 cup of softened butter, and a 1/4 cup of shredded coconut, and 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon. And so basically what I've done is I've made a paste with it. And so you see the consistency, you can kind of form it into a ball. And so all you're going to do is you're going to take your hollowed out apple and you're just going to put that right inside there. And you're going to stick that into an oven-proof dish. And so once that's done, you're going to just fill up the bottom, just so you cover the bottom with some boiling water, and put that in the oven at 375 on the bottom rack of your oven for about 50 or so minutes, 45 to 50 minutes. And then I'll show you the finished product in a minute. So when I pull out my apples out of the oven, you want them to be nice and soft. They're cooked through, and your topping has got a nice crust and is nice and brown on top. And then you can serve it up in a small dish here. Serve it up nice and hot with a scoop of vanilla ice cream. It would be amazing. And that is our baked apples with pecans and coconut.